Okay, thank you everyone for coming to the meeting. And I would like to introduce the speaker today. We are very lucky to have Professor Dr. Doc Petke, who is the head of the Department of Physics at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, Worcester, Massachusetts. Dr. Petke is earned his bachelor's in science in physics from Carnegie Mellon University and his PhD in physics from Ohio State University in 1996. As the department head, he works closely with his colleagues to shape the strategic direction of the physics department at WPI. He is committed to fostering a collaborative and inclusive academic environment that promotes interdisciplinary research, integrates cutting-edge research with teaching, and supports faculty and students' professional development. His research focuses on the fundamental interactions between light and matter, particularly photonic integrated circuits for sensing applications and millimeter and terahertz science and technology. With that, I would like to request Dr. Petke for the talk. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you. And so I titled this Faculty Searches, the Nonlinear Process, because it's one of the most difficult things that we all participate in. And it's also not a linear one, like a lot of us would like. So first, happy winter solstice. This is not, the picture on the left is not what was like. They had a live feed on YouTube. So the upper right hand, it was a very cloudy day in England. So that was the crowd. And then a little bit later, that was the crowd at Stonehenge. So anyway, happy winter solstice. The days are going to be getting longer. That's very good. It's winter, or at least for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere. Or far north, at least. Okay, so point one, the reason I said it's the nonlinear process is faculty searches are the hardest, most time-consuming things you can do on a committee. I think anybody that's been on a committee would probably agree. The other thing is, it's hard on both ends, right? It's hard for the search committee. It's also hard for the applicants. And then I kind of look at it as we're kind of seeking a potential lifetime commitment, kind of a marriage potentially, and then finding the right partners is what we're trying to do. But it's a very brief process with a lot of information, and so it gets very difficult. So usually there's many more people and searches I've participated in that we would like to hire than we get to hire, right? And so it's very difficult. And then each stage of the process reveals new dimensions and considerations. And so you learn something, you go from the applicant to the Zoom interview, typically to an on-site interview. And typically things change in each one of those stages. So again, I got my PhD and bachelor's from Pennsylvania, Ohio. There are, to provide some of my own background, they're both R1 universities, right? They're massive universities. I think Ohio State had close to 70 faculty when I was a graduate student. So it was massive. My faculty positions, I'll highlight each one in a separate slide, but have been primarily in Ohio. So I stayed in Ohio and then made the jump to New England in 2016, and now at that. And then I also have had some experiences at various labs and sabbaticals, both East Coast and West Coast, as well as in Germany. So I think it's just easiest to types of questions I can help answer at the end might are probably informed by my experiences, right? So in '96, I got my PhD. I was debating industry versus academia. At the time, academia was extremely difficult to get into. Bluffton College is a rural, primarily undergraduate institute affiliated with the Mennonite Church. I was the second faculty member in physics. There was already one there. Only 1 to 3 majors. I taught the same course 5 times a year on a 3-2 load. And it was to every single freshman coming into the school. So it was a integrated sciences approach promoted by Leah Lenderman. where you take physics, then chemistry, then biology as a liberal arts part of your curriculum. And then at that, I stayed engaged in research at Ohio State because it was about 2 hours away. Yeah, there were 300 applicants for that. So that was, and I had to make a decision between that and an NRC postdoc. And so I chose the faculty route just because it was so difficult to get at the time. Still is. Anyway, one of the things is because it was close, I visited a few places when I was applying. So I visited Bluffton. I assume that had an impact. I just reached out and said, you know, they're not too far away before I apply, or maybe I usually would do this before applying, is say, could I come out and just do a very brief visit just to say hi and not overwhelm anybody with like a schedule or anything, just to say hi. So I did that there. I did that at maybe it was James Madison. I was driving to a workshop at the Green Bank Telescope, and just stopped by there too. That one didn't work out. I didn't get. I applied to that one and didn't get interviewed, but the Bluffton one I got interviewed at. So I was a little bit. I'd call it aggressive, but you have to do it. You know, you can't be overly aggressive. I switched to the next town over. So Bluffton and Ada are side by side. And I only applied for this job because somebody there I knew from Ohio State was leaving and they encouraged me to apply. So it was kind of a referral. And so I didn't have to move houses, stayed in the same town. I was one of 4 faculty, primarily undergraduate institute, private, rural, United Methodist Church. Now, Bluffton, the students had time for the religious activities. At Ohio Northern, they didn't. So there's different types of places. I remember applying to a place in Tennessee where I would have had to have signed a form saying I would not drink alcohol, which, so, and as Rudra may know, I I do that. So I did not apply to that place. I was not going to get up front and lie and stuff like that. But anyway, 3,000 students. Ohio Northern has engineering, business, pharmacy, law. So each one of these things, it's much different. Bluffton was a liberal arts school. This is a little bit more of a tech school. Bluffton, I did not have a research lab. I had a research lab at Ohio Northern, but no startup funds. So it was more for student projects. I stayed connected to Ohio State for research. And after 4 years, I could have stayed there. I probably wouldn't have stayed at Bluffton because it was just teaching one course and waiting for somebody to retire to teach more courses. So that was, I probably wouldn't have stayed there, but here I would have stayed. And it was rural Ohio, so we just I started exploring places closer to cities, quite frankly. But so it was the first time I was on a search committee, and I actually replaced myself. So I had to wait for a whole year to take the next job. And I was, I guess in Congress you would call it lame duck, because I was already signed another job offer and still taught there for a year. And so that year I participated in the search to replace me. Then I'd say I moved to Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio, and found a career. And so again, I only applied to a few selective positions. I was very selective at that point. I had a job that I liked. And then I joined a faculty of about 15 that had masters. It was an R2 university, and so high research activity. I did have a modest startup in a research lab and started doing my own independent research at that point. A mid-sized state school with 16,000 students, more majors. And then I say it was a career because I came in as tenure track and ended as department chair and was about to become the university Senate president. You could go VP to president. So I'd say I probably definitely had a long career there. We also established a PhD program, and then I was highly integrated into the university. And it was named after the Wright brothers. So they did a lot of their research in Dayton on warped wings and stuff like that. And so then I jumped from airplanes to rockets, and more of again, I was referred to for this position. I was the only application I submitted. I did submit to become dean at Wright State. And so in doing that, I had a full application ready. And then the former chair of Wright State graduated from WPI with his PhD and had a faculty position there. And I was meeting him at a conference, and I mentioned that I saw there's a department head position open at WPI, and then he nominated me, and that got the ball rolling. And so, and I only applied because it's one of the themes is I carefully reviewed it. But it's a R2. We're about to become an R1, although we struggle with resources. We're project-based learning. We have about 20 to 25 graduates a year, undergraduate, and 25 PhD students, and very technical. We're project-based learning, STEM school. And then in both at Wright State and WPI, I have established a research lab with significant external funding and more committees than I could shake a stick at, too many committees. And so I'd say there's about 2 on average per year, whether I'm either involved in another department search or within our department. So, some of my thoughts on going for is faculty position. I probably thought earlier in my career it's a little bit different. You have ideas of the ivory tower and stuff like that, and that you'll just be given problems to do, right? And it's not that way. It's you're running your own business, and so I think the better mindset is faculty are all entrepreneurs, especially in today's climate when there's a lot of schools closing down and the enrollment cliff is coming, and so there's going to be fewer people going to universities, and we have to get very creative. And I also just see the workforce gap. A lot of companies need employees, and we need to make those connections better somehow before the next administration does things to even make it worse for us. So I sort of say, be curious. We're all trained to do research. Be a physicist when looking for a job. Study the system, right? The system is the university. Study the department and university when you're applying for positions, and understand what it is you're applying to. Not a lot of us just want a job, and I get that, but don't just blindly apply to places, right? And so what is your value proposition, thinking of entrepreneurship for the department or university? And we do a lot more than just physics, right? Again, I was very naive in my first job, right? The amount of physics you get to do is not as much as we would like. The other thing, maybe another point, faculty departments and universities grow together to mutually beneficial, right? Again, people are trying to get a job, but look past the interview and envision yourself 5 years. Where do you want to be in 5 years? So that's a typical question, right? And of course, the answer would be tenured, but there's a lot to go from getting the job to getting tenure, right? So what do you need to get there? What do you need from the university? What do you offer the university? And then sometimes one of the questions we ask is, once you're established, how do you envision your research group, your teaching, your service and community? And so thinking ahead to not just starting out, but what your envision is. And so in that case, when you're applying to a certain place, try to find out as much as you can about what people are there, what does their research look like, what does their teaching look like. And this can not be easy, right? Our web page isn't super informational on that. Some faculty keep good web pages, other faculty don't. And then, but usually you can dig into the registration web page or the registrar's web page and see what courses are offered, probably see who the instructors are. There's lots of places to get information, stuff like that. So search to see what you can find. How big are the groups? You know, if you're envisioning having 5 postdocs and 10 PhD students, you would not fit into WPI. We don't have enough room for a group that big, literally. We're sort of a smaller campus with limited infrastructure. And so you can find this information out. I have links later, like the AIP, like how many PhDs graduate per year, how many are enrolled, how many faculty are there? And you can kind of start doing the math. We have 25 PhD students and 20 faculty. So not everyone has a PhD student. So about 2 PhD students, 11 TAs. So maybe one TA per half a faculty, stuff like that. So you can sort of get a sense for, that's drastically different from Ohio State or maybe one of the Big Ten schools or MIT, where the faculty sometimes have their own administrative assistants, right, to help them submit their proposals. We have 2 administrative assistants for 20 people, right? So even looking at that infrastructure is telling. And then there's a match between that environment and your vision and what you want. Some other things, I'm not an absolutist. I don't believe in strict rules or stuff like that. I sort of like working in the gray region. So anything in here, I might say one thing and then say another thing, and it's probably confusing. I also, this is more philosophy. So there are no answers. I think when we're teaching our students, they always want to get to the answer. What's the number? And of course, as teachers, we don't care about that. We care about the process and how you move forward and think. So the same thing with faculty applications. People are involved in the process, the search committees, the candidates, not fundamental laws of physics. And then institutions and search committees have their own processes. We constantly try to fight biases. We all have them. And so we're trying to just be aware of them and making the best informed decision. And then I always say that, get as much advice as you can. And then some advice, if it sounds strange, then it's probably not good advice for you. It might be good advice for somebody else. And so, so take advice that makes sense to you and synthesize that and reflect on it. And I always say the imposter syndrome. I still don't think I should be a department head. So fake it until you make it, right? But make sure that you can get to the end. You don't want to keep faking it forever, obviously. But I think we all start off with, even becoming a faculty member initially, it's overwhelming. And we don't get trained for that. Back in the day, we didn't get trained for teaching, right? Now we do have training programs for faculty to become teachers. We just would ask advice and repeat what we saw. That's not always the best thing. So there's lots of resources. So I was just looking at these yesterday and today. So this is out of higher education. And there was actually one, 10 essential guidelines to successfully chair a search committee. Well, if you're a candidate, it's also good to look at what the chair of the search committee is doing, and understand the processes both ways, not just from your own viewpoint. And when I was applying for jobs, I never thought about how the behind the veil works, right? What does the search committee do? So I think that, and I read this, and it's essentially the same thing I have on the next few slides. But then there's a few other ones, right, that are also good reading and stuff like that. So the search process, to go back to how that starts, it starts internally, obviously, with a value proposition that the department has to make to the dean, to the provost, to the CFO, on the type of mission, whether it's research. We call our traditional research one's a dual mission now, so it's teaching and research. So again, we're a school that highly values teaching, so you can't just plan to do research and say, oh, the TA will do my teaching. That doesn't work at our university. Other universities, it could work at larger ones that are, again, the very large R1s. But then there's also just teaching mission ones that would like to still be able to do some research, right? Again, when I landed at Bluffton, I couldn't really do any research. I didn't have any space. I did have my own lab for teaching physics, but that's not the same thing. So I think even teaching mission people want to be able to do something to stay active. And so that's also important. Is that a constraint? What's your teaching load? And then also when we're setting up to do a search, what type of research are we going for? Are we able to deliver courses effectively? Do we need teaching mission? Are there retention problems? Are we expanding our programs? Like AI is super hot right now, stuff like that. And so there could be a very specific ad or a very general one or something in between, right? And so want to carefully look at the ads. And if you don't fit the ad, I say don't apply, because it's usually not going to work, right? Nothing magical happens in applying. Search committees formed, ads created, posted. There's training and recruitment, and then the review process. And then the review process is we tend to use rubrics based on the ad and based on our department. And then we look for different levels of evidence from candidates on that. And evidence could just be awareness, like active learning is huge right now, and the physics and how physics education is seeping in is huge. So awareness of that doesn't mean you have to have done it, but you should be aware of it. If you've done it, then certainly talk about the evidence and be specific. Likewise, on hot topics in research, are you aware of the trends in the research and also trends in funding and stuff like that? So once the applications come in, we narrow down to what I'd call a very long list of maybe 30, and then we try to get to 10, and then what we call the long list is about 10 Zoom interviews is very typical. And it could be 6 and it could be 15. It just depends on the details of the search. And we try not to, they're very difficult, right? This is what I'm talking about. Going from, say, 100 applications to 10 is very difficult. Although I would say about the first 20 to 30 of those are probably people that applied as soon as the position posted within 3 microseconds. And there's no way they could have done any homework on the Institute, and that kind of shows as a poor application. So, so that long list, there is typically a Zoom interview, say with 10 people. It's scripted. So usually the way we do ours is we go around the room, the search committee, each person asks 1 or 2 questions. And then we get to Q&A that's a little bit more unscripted, where essentially the candidate can interview us and ask us questions, right? But in going from that, obviously we've read your application. So don't just simply read your application. You want to have prepare for it and tell us sort of a narrative verbally during that process, and then hopefully get to a point where there's a conversation, right? That's sort of the goal. But following that, we'll have lots of deliberations, and then shortlist for on-sites. I didn't go too much into this, but usually we have 3 or 4 candidates. It's usually a full day or maybe split over 2, depending on travel logistics. And then there's a lot of different components that we seek input from in the department, from undergraduates, graduates, faculty, staff, supporting, and then also people outside supporting. And then the next difficult stage is deciding who to make an offer to. And I'll have some recommendations that's sort of our process from my viewpoint and the search committee's viewpoint. So what are some of the components? And I think I think it's right here. I'll jump ahead 1 slide and then back up. So we have a search going on right now, and so it asks for cover letter, CV with publications, obviously, and then teaching experiences and plans, research experiences and plans. We used to use the word teaching philosophy. I don't like teaching philosophies. It's got to be grounded in what we're actually doing. There's these ideal philosophies of, if we were in a perfect world, everybody would learn everything, and et cetera, and we're not. Students are constantly changing, faculty are constantly changing, and we have to adapt. So, of course, if it's a research position, this is obviously really important, but the teaching experiences should not be neglected, right? And so each one of these elements is important. And then a statement is, how do you become a good steward of the community, essentially, create an inclusive and supportive environment for everyone. And then we've gone to not asking for letters of rec, because if there's 100 applications and we have 3, that's 300 people that have to write letters. We all we all know how much we're working already. So we usually just ask for that. And then if at the appropriate stage we want to, we tell the candidates we're going to ask for letters of rec. Let me back up. The cover letter, I find the cover letter is very important. It's a sort of a 1 to 2 page narrative that ties together all of your other documents, right, into a story of why this university that you're applying to, and then why you're a good fit for the position. And so connected narrative and story of the materials, not just copying and pasting, but try to weave together the story. And again, during the Zoom interview, that would be a component of how are you going to balance teaching and research and those types of questions into narratives. And then also, this indicates a little bit about, have you done some initial homework on who you're applying to? Again, I'll go back to, if you think you're going to have a startup package that has 2 postdocs and 3 students, that's not the size of our startup packages, right? And not the size even, there's a few people on campus that elevate to that level where they may have 3 postdocs and stuff. But it's not typical. On the other hand, you are expected to support graduate students in the PhD program. And so that does mean you are expected to get funding. Anyway, if I flip back to this first the slide, be as evidence-based as possible. And then again, I look at things as awareness. It exists, but you haven't done it. You've engaged in it, and then you're established in it. That's sort of the 3 levels I think about in terms of a continuum of knowing things. And so what have you done? How did it go? Assessment, and then, you know, let's see, I'm blocking the screen here. And then what do you know about it and what would you like to try and stuff like that. So also just not what you've done, but what you'd like to try at the new university. When you go to the research part, there's the research narrative, and then there's what you need to do the research. And then at some point, if there's a research, there will be a startup package, and then there's what's proposed, and then is the startup package enough to get people off and running before they get their funding, right? So we would expect the startup probably to be the bridge from the first 2 or 3 years until somebody gets funding to come in. I usually wouldn't say include budgets in the beginning unless it's asked for, but be thinking about that when you're writing your research narrative. Like, how much will you need from the university to get started? If you ask something too high, it might not be considered depending on where you're applying to. If you go too low, you might not be successful, right? And so you have to scope out what you can do at that particular university that you're interested in. And this one's very tricky. This is very entrepreneurial, right? And then also, if you're interested in salaries, public universities, there's usually websites you can go to find salaries. At Wright State, we had them in the library. Of course, you can't get to the library, but everything's probably online now. But you could go look up any faculty member salary in the library, and that always became very contentious. That's how you look up, right? Anyway. Let's see. Long list for Zoom interviews. If you get to that stage, right, they're time limited. See if you can get the questions. Certainly do more homework and practice. So get to know you've made it to the stage of you've done some homework. You think it's a good fit. Now redo that homework and try to get very specific. And then this is also the time for you to interview the university, right? So what do you want to know? What's the mentoring and support systems for you as a tenure track faculty member or whatever position you're taking? What's the ecosystem? What's types of students? What are their backgrounds? Are there postdocs? Are there, how many TAs are there? What are the teaching loads in the facilities, et cetera? So again, what you can't find out online, and you have those questions, this is a really good time to ask those questions during that Zoom interview. And then you can also look at things like data dashboards, student fact books. I think this is what they used to call them. Grad School Shopper, AIP Statistics, right? You click on this and it takes you to numbers of students that are graduated from each school, how many PhD students there are. Again, it sets there's a lot of universities out there, and you kind of don't want to say something that's very disconnected, right? And so the more specific your questions are, the more you want to make sure that it's close to what the university is like and not something drastically different. And you remember, the committee has read your materials carefully, so this is more of a conversation, and it's in two-way. And then sort of some closing thoughts, and then maybe we can have a discussion based on other people's experiences as well as questions. But closing thoughts: carefully read the job and review the university in multiple ways before applying. Make sure it's something that you want to go to, and that getting that cover letter and again, for me personally, a good cover letter is very important. Shows that people have done some homework and have realistic expectations if they were to get the job, and not unrealistic. When will the applications start to be reviewed, or when will they close? Don't hurry and be the first to apply. Hopefully there's more than 2 applications, but a little typo there. Don't be the first to apply, because that probably means you haven't read anything about the university. So again, when people apply in the first 3 microseconds, I'm highly suspicious that anyway. Be thorough and concise, and have sort of an expanded elevator pitch, going back to entrepreneurialism. So again, if you've served on a search committee and you have 100 applications and each one's 20 pages, that's not fun. And as we all know, writing concisely is very difficult in telling a story. So that is very powerful if you can have a research narrative in 3 pages versus 5 pages, and the faculty and the search committee says, yeah, this is a powerful research plan, and it's done in 3 pages versus 5, right? So that's communication skills. And then I'm not going to talk a lot about on-site interview, but we could maybe discuss that. But each time you want to study the university more and more, and obviously if you're going to be on site, you want to know it really well. It's also a chance for you to meet people that in other departments or other infrastructures that you would like to learn about, that would help you become a successful faculty member. So suggest what you'd like to see. Like, for instance, we have a Morgan Teaching and Learning Center at WPI that helps faculty quite a bit. And so they used to be on the interview list, and post-pandemic things have shifted, and so they're not automatically on the list, but if faculty request them, then we make time for that. Same thing with the research office, that if you're interested in talking to, we have a Research Solutions Institute, right? And we're not going to cover that in the ad, but if you go through the websites and find that and say, oh, this are there certain research organizations on campus I should speak to? And these would just be probably 15 or 20 or 30-minute meetings, but we can also rearrange that. And so again, you want to make sure you're going to be successful in the position. And then that's also telling us that you're being proactive in thinking about these things. I think that's it. I was going to say the knowing your audience is one thing. And so this is going to be my opening slide, but then I looked online, and cats are evil in Nepal, I guess, right? And Rudra and I were talking that we both share the don't let a cat cross your path, it's bad luck. And so rather than opening with, so one of my themes is knowing your audience. So I'll switch to pets that are more favorable. And then this is my son and Louie, my sister's dog, when we were visiting them in the summer. So anyway, I think that's it. So I can stop sharing. And,
thank you so much, Professor Perky, for this very useful talk, because we came from a different place, like in a different country, like different language background, different culture, and like that, and how to get the job and faculty position, how to apply. And this is like really helpful talk. So if any of you have any question, so please feel free to unmute and ask, or uh, post the question in the chat box. I will read the question.
I think
But
there's a
while,
hand raised.
or you can, yeah, oh yeah, I see a hand raised here. Dr. Parsu Khalil from, I believe, South Dakota State University. So, Dr. Khalil, could you please unmute and ask the question? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would like just to make a comment that very nice talk. Thank you very much. We just completed a dean search and then assistant professor search last, and then this process covers everything there. So thank you very much.
Good, yeah, thank you. And that also, for those that have done these things and would like to add something, certainly do, because I have a very limited, I try to give my background, and that's what it is. I have not been in an R1 other than as a student and stuff like that. And R1s and different regions can all be different. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Khalil, for that question. Like, while we are waiting for other question, oh, I believe there is a question now. Dr. Ramakanta Tsapai, so could you please unmute and ask the question? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah, this is very relevant and very timely for me. I have a couple of questions if we have time. So I'm getting some interviews, and I have a mixed experience of this teaching and research. I'm coming from National Lab, and I have I would say extensive experience of teaching in the past. So, but it's been more than 10 years back in Nepal, and then the question comes, okay, should I highlight my teaching experience, way back from the past? How relevant is it to highlight those, 10 years, you are from 2023 to 2013, or, this really, really old experience, and how do I make the case? So this teaching is, because I'm coming from National Lab, and okay, and a lot of these R2 universities, they want balance between teaching and research, and do you have teaching experience? And I do, but right now I'm doing extensive research. So maybe this is more specific to my case, but most of the R2, they want balance between teaching and research, and some interviews are lining up, so that would be very helpful for my case.
Yeah, we can. My first thought is certainly have some balance. Don't ignore the teaching, and you're not doing that. I think it can depend highly on the search committee is, or any hints that they've given you. So it sounds like they want you to talk about it, and so that's a hint, right?
Right.
And I don't know in those positions if they're very specific research areas or if it's general, right? And so you have to get the sense of, that goes back to, why was the position created to begin with? Was it to hire an outstanding researcher and really elevate the research and the funding, or is it a balance? Right? And so, yeah, I would certainly be ready to highlight your past experiences, and this is where you can pivot if it's at the Zoom stage. Have I would say have things queued up. If a question comes up, or if you have to pivot to it, you want to say something strong about the past, and then also knowing about current trends, especially with active learning and different pedagogical techniques. And there's now ungrading and stuff like that, which I still struggle with in terms of ungrading, but it's allowing students to take agency while still meeting the learning outcomes. And again, if some of those things you don't feel comfortable saying it, then don't say it, because then you might get yourself into a trap and double talking. So pick something that says, oh, that sounds like a really good idea. Let me read a little bit more about that, and I would want to try that if I got this position, or something like that.
Thank you so much.
Anybody else on that?
Dr. Praveen Sharma, I think Praveen Sharma is from Nepal. I don't know. Like, okay, yeah, please go ahead and unmute and ask question. Thank you.
Nice talk and very helpful. My question is not related to interview or other, but I'm currently at the stage where should I be going to academia or industry? So I'm, juggling in between those two. So how to focus on one and finalize that for myself personally, I'm in 4th year PhD. So next year I would be starting to do like applications either for postdoc or, so I'm confused in that way.
Right. In my own, I started by applying to at least a few industry jobs. I had no idea. I was doing the postdocs applications, industry applications, and then faculty applications. At that time, I obviously was not as selective. I applied to probably 20 or 30 universities when I was coming out, right? Very naive, right? I remember some of them, if they got, this is back when you had to mail everything, right? Some of them got returned without being open because they missed the deadline and stuff like that. But I looked at all of those, and I think it's good to try to get his experiences in each one, or find out, not maybe necessarily direct experiences, but find out different experiences. I do see this gap I mentioned between the technical workforce that's needed and then the preparing STEM students, and there still seems to be a gap. So I would go after look at all venues. That's my own, because I tend to be a very curious person. I'd probably be happy in any one of a number of careers. I wouldn't want to obviously be unhappy. And so I think I was looking at the automotive industry when I first came out. There was a place near Columbus where I interviewed, and I was probably a little too naive. I think they would ask me some engineering terms about some various statistical analyses, and they were talking, engineers and physicists speak differently to each other. And I didn't realize what was being asked of me until after the interview. And I was like, oh, I used that technique all the time. They just called it something different.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect, is when you're going into the industry environment, maybe try to see what, there's only so many laws of physics, right? Everything runs by physics, but
Yes.
we can label things differently. And so that tripped me up. Otherwise, I might be in the automotive industry right now. I will say I was interviewing once for a position. After I got established, I was very selective. And so that's a luxury, right, at that point. And I remember interviewing somewhere, and I didn't like, it was a one-on-one with another faculty member, and I felt the interview was kind of a little confrontational, or I don't know. It didn't, and I was a little bit short with my answers, and I'm sure that buried me in that one. I didn't get the job, but at that point, I was like, so another department of 4 people, and if I'm not going to like one of the colleagues, I probably don't want to be there. But anyway, that was one I probably sabotaged my own interview. But the questions were very strange. I didn't.
Well, thank you for
Thank you.
answering.
Thank you, Praveen Sharma, for very relevant question.
And again, I was somewhere where I was very happy. Anyway.
Yeah, I believe there is a question from Dr. Pasupati Dhaka.
Good morning, and thank you. Very nice for talk. I probably gonna be specific to my area. Basically, I work with the national lab, and we hire a lot of scientists and engineers. The one of the thing we look for is like the competency and how skilled is this one. So, in terms of the research and teaching, we understand there is a teaching philosophy and how good the person is in teaching, right? Is there any criteria like the research, because the field or the experience he has, it like you have to pick up from one set of expertise. So how does that goes with this? Since there is a hiring, we say we want some biomedical, material science, and this one. And how do you pick up like, hey, this is the biomedical is better, or the condensed matter is better, on those kind of things?
Yeah, that one's tough. I'm not sure I have any answer for that one. I mean, we tend to assume that there's a competency, right, of a technical competency, and we probably don't query that as much as look for red flags, I would think. And so when you're reviewing, right, you do get the letters of recommendation. Usually letters of recommendation are all favorable, and so you have to read them a little more carefully and maybe even call some of them. And then there's the technical competencies. I would say I would probably ask, since you're hiring somebody technical for a purely technical job, I would probably ask for evidence-based, right? What are some very specific techniques that you use to solve a particular problem that you're having a difficulty with? And then try to get a story out of the candidates that way, and ask them for the specific examples. I think the other thing is just the interpersonal and professional skills, right? Will that part of all the things that are non-technical, will they be good at that too? And that's sometimes where candidates, it's sometimes hard to see that one, and it's easier to go back and look at letters of reference and stuff like that. In terms of, will they be a good colleague and get things done timely and be open to doing things that nobody wants to work on and stuff like that. So,
Right. If I may, I want to follow up on the same
yeah,
one,
go ahead.
letter of recommendation one. As you said earlier, like almost all the recommendations are positive, right? So you done go for the recommendation will give you the negative recommendation, basically, right? How much does it value at the recommendation? Is the last resort kind of things, or the you start from the beginning? Hey, let's go through the recommendation. If this is a good person, because you don't usually don't get a bad recommendation letters, right?
Right. I think that I had at one of my previous universities, I had a very difficult faculty member, and I at some point went back and looked at the application materials. And in the letters of recommendation, they explicitly said that faculty member can be difficult to work with at times. Anyway, that's just a side story. The this is probably more at the, I think probably more at the on-site, following the on-site when you interact with somebody and you're trying to get a sense for how good of a colleague they'll be. And if there's maybe some concerns at that point, then rereading the letters of recommendation to see if any of that you read through first is all positive, and maybe something just leans a little bit to the side as a potential indicator. I will say I've hired in the past where there was a concern, and that concern was actually addressed in talking with one of the letter writers. So I ended up doing a verbal Zoom or phone call. I think it was a Zoom. And they actually brought it up and said, this person, I won't go into the specifics, but they said, one of the downsides, you always say, what's the pros and the cons, or the weaknesses and the strengths? And we tend to not want to write the weaknesses because we don't want to doom anybody. And but they brought that up as the thing we observed as a weakness, and it kind of fit into my holistic view, and we ended up hiring the person, and it worked out. But so sometimes those things, you pick up on something and maybe it's okay, and then maybe it's not. So I would probably recommend permission to maybe talk to the, seeing if you can contact, if they put at the bottom, please contact me if you have any questions, then do it. Ask for a Zoom, and try to get, people will say things more verbally than they would in writing. So at least that's my experience.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. And the writing, most of the recommendation, I would say 99% of the time would be the positive. So,
Exactly.
and how do you actually evaluate those as a letter of recommendation?
Right. Again, we tend to try to be very evidence-based, but even that's hard. Even when I'm writing the letters, I try to, I'm like, okay, what kind of example can I pull out that's evidence-based, right? And it's hard to do. So
Yeah. All right.
I think getting somebody
Thank you so much.
getting somebody online and just saying, can you give me an example of X, Y, or Z, and then let them just talk through it.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Rakal, for that question. I believe there is a question in the chat box. Let me see. From Watson. A nice information, Professor Doug, as a department chair and faculty search committee member, how important the follow-up message before and after interviews. Whom do you prefer, fresh graduate or someone having postdoctoral experience? Thank you.
Right. Yeah, the follow-up's nice. It's not necessary. I assume, I think I would probably say do the follow-up and just thank the point person is nice to do. Some people, it doesn't have any influence on for me, the decision-making process, whether somebody follows up, right? I got that right, the question correct, right? But it's a nice thing to do, especially if it's an on-site. And um, I think if there's something that comes up in a follow-up that you wanted to add, like I was saying, if I had to follow up on my industrial interview and said, I knew what you were talking about, which I didn't, I think that's can be very beneficial or something like that. So if there's something that you add to what was already said in a short way, that follow-up is good. And then the experience versus, I think it's certainly hard to beat experience. So if somebody's has a several postdocs or one postdoc, obviously they're more experienced, but then you get into, do those experiences line up with the trajectory of the position everyone envisions? And it could be that the fresh PhD student might show a better trajectory to the vision or coupling, but those are just very specific, right? It's very hard to give details on that. It's because some of the applications I know. One of the departments at WPI is just looking at research plans, and they're not looking at names or anything. And they have, I think, 200 applications for the faculty position already. And they're breaking the committee up so that 2 people only read the research narrative, and then they're doing their sorting based on that. Then they're going to look at everything else. So that's an interesting one, but it's trying to remove bias and trying to obviously find a research trajectory that will help with the department. Eventually, everything's holistic, though. You look at the cover letter, the whole application, et cetera, et cetera. So I suppose if you're fresh PhD and you have, in that example, have an outstanding research plan, you're probably going to rise up pretty quickly. Or if it's a teaching place and you have very strong teaching and they do something like that, I think your application would rise up pretty high. Of course, the holistic is, they might say, oh, you're just about to graduate, your ABD, all but dissertation. But if that teaching plan or research plan really differentiates you, then that could be one of the things that helps.
Thank you. I have one, probably this is, if there is any question, please feel free to ask. But I have one question, like, we came from Nepal mostly, and our first language is not English. So we did, although we did our colleges and universities teach in English medium, but our mother tongue is Nepali. So how much impact does that do in applying the faculty positions, and how do we remain competent, like to other applicants who have like first language English, for example? Any thoughts I would like to share? Thank you.
No, I think that becomes highly dependent on the search committee and the environment and the people. So that this is just an unfortunate. I would, at some level, this is a bias, and at another level, it's whether or not people can effectively communicate or not verbally, right? And so this one's really difficult. I've hired somebody where the dean said you're going to have to make that person take English language lessons. And I was like, no, I don't think so. But they did fine, got tenure and everything, but struggled as English wasn't their first language. Other faculty member would immediately just disqualify the candidate, and there would have to be a struggle, within the search committee for that. So I don't know that there's much you can do other than practice, and then just do the best you can. And then in the case I was giving, where we hired somebody that perhaps didn't have fluent English at that point, was there were other traits during it was during an on-site interview, the other traits that stood out where there were strong interactions with students and faculty, and especially one-on-one. And I would say that that particular interview was very difficult. It was me and another faculty member took that person to dinner in a very noisy restaurant, and when there's a slight language barrier in a very noisy restaurant, we got through it, but it was very difficult to communicate. So I think in that case, reflecting on that, had we known that, maybe I would have picked a quieter place to have dinner and stuff like that. So maybe control what you can control. If you have something like that, make sure it's in a place where you're comfortable and don't have other battles like noise environments and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you so much. I believe there is a question from Dr. Jagan Devkota. Sorry, missed many things, but one thing that comes in mind with evolving AI, how does the selection committee judge in sorting the candidates if the write-ups are original of the candidates or not?
It would be hard to if it's clearly, well, we don't run them through AI checkers or anything, but I myself will use AI to improve my writing. I do not use it to create my writing. And I do think at this point at some point we probably won't be able to tell the difference, but it would be negatively perceived to use AI to generate the cover letter or something like that. I would say you could use it to, I would say write the cover letter, and then you might say AI make it better. But then when I do that, if it gives phrases that I would never use, I don't use them because it's not me. But if it switches the wording around and makes it more concise and more to the point, then I'm like, okay, great, I'll use this. Yeah, I wouldn't use it to generate it. I would use it to learn, not to finalize, or to I wouldn't use it to create. On the flip side, this is a whole new thing. I've actually had, in the last class I taught, I encouraged students to use AI, but they had to be completely transparent about it. Like I used AI so I had one student that said, yeah, I did solve the homework problem. I had no idea. I said it didn't make sense. The answer didn't make sense. This was good, right? Recognizing nonsensical answers. And then he asked AI where did he make a mistake, and it showed him, and then he corrected it. And I was like, perfect. I think that's a use of AI.
Okay. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Professor Pedke, for giving all these insights and your experiences of many, many years for, let's say, your own experience as well as hiring faculty members while you were head of the department or chair of the search committee. So we'd like to thank you so much. It is the end of the hour. So let's thank Professor Pedke.
Thanks. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, have a good rest of the day. And it's nighttime in the fall.
In Nepal, it is like 9 p.m. Yep.
And then for the West Coasters, it's
early morning. Yes.
Oh, a little early.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great. Bye-bye.
Yep. Thanks.
How do I leave the meeting? Oh, there it is.
Okay.
Okay, Tikaji, I think you can stop the recording.